the RISE Education Systems Diagnostic Toolkit. So this is quite a different type of tool from the learning trajectories that we just talked through. And so in this case, so the RISE Diagnostic has three main purposes that we set out for. So the first is to diagnose. So to facilitate the use of systems thinking, to diagnose the parts of an education system that are, as we say, not working together as well as they could to deliver learning. Another way to say that would be that aren't very well aligned for learning. Maybe they're misaligned with each other, or they're misaligned for learning goals. So to diagnose what parts of the system are not aligned well for learning. The second then is to prioritize, so to facilitate high-level prioritization of the one or two key areas that the system, where the system needs reform in order to create better alignment around learning. So I think often when people think systems thinking or systems approaches, it's like, well, we have to do everything at once, and we can't do everything at once, so we just can't start on that. But an explicit part of the RISE diagnostic is to prioritize and try to identify which system constraints are most critical to alleviate to improve learning outcomes. And then finally, to build consensus, so to foster a common understanding across stakeholders of both the diagnosis and then the priorities. So there's strong buy-in when you go to implement the changes. And so there have been 7 pilots of the RISE Education Systems Diagnostic since 2019. You can see here it's from kind of a pretty wide variety of countries and contexts where this has been implemented. It's been implemented by a partner organization in every case, and that they have partnered with the government actors, the relevant government actors, in order to undertake the diagnostic process. And then a little bit on the content of the diagnostic itself and the RISE framework, which informs the process. And so the RISE diagnostic is based on the RISE Education Systems framework, which defines a few key elements in the system. So first, it defines the key actors and the relationships between these actors, and it defines 4 primary relationships in education systems. So the first is politics. This is how citizens relate to the state. The second is compact. This is how the state relates to the Ministry of Education. The third one is management. This is how the ministry relates to the schools and teachers, kind of the frontline workers. And then finally, voice and choice. And this is how the community and parents relate to schools or teachers. It's how they express their preferences and desires for their children's education directly to those frontline workers. And then the framework takes those 4 relationships and then describes how they relate to each other through 5 main system levers. And so these are the 5 main elements that we would say are a part of each relationship. So the first is delegation, and these are the goals or priorities that are set in the education system. What is the education system working towards? What are the goals that they're trying to pull towards? The second is finance. What are the resources that are made available for achieving those goals and priorities? The third is support. So what are the training, the coaching, the ongoing support that are provided, again, for achieving those goals and priorities? Information is how performance is evaluated, what metrics are being collected, what's being measured in the system. If, for example, on that, a lot of education systems say they want to achieve strong learning outcomes, but the only thing that's being measured is maybe enrollment, not learning in a systematic way. And then finally, motivation. So how are the different actors in the system kind of being motivated towards achieving those goals? And motivation can be either extrinsic, so outside motivational factors, or intrinsic incentives. So having the people in the system who are intrinsically motivated and driven to achieve whatever outcomes the education system is working towards. And then these fit together into a framework, which we at RISE lovingly refer to as the 5x4, because it's a matrix with those 5 system levers down the side, and then the 4 relationships across the top. And this is just kind of a short illustration of how the framework is kind of used in the diagnostic process. So for example, what the diagnostic does is walk through these different parts of the system to identify where misalignments are that may be constraining learning. And so in this illustration, so let's say that the ministry has expects teachers to deliver a curriculum that's prioritizing foundational literacy for all. Maybe if we're working towards, literacy, we're pretty excited about this. Maybe we think it's a really strong curriculum. We think it's aligned well for learning. And then let's say the ministry has planned and allocated and put in place a mechanism for coaching to help teachers implement the new curriculum. This is a really evidence-backed way to support teachers. Again, if we're kind of trying to work towards literacy, maybe we're pretty excited about this as well. Like, this seems really, promising. But then you kind of keep going down and get to information and find in the system that actually, despite these efforts towards foundational learning curriculum and coaching, there's not really information being collected on foundational learning, though. The main source of information in the system are exams that come at the end of primary school, primary leaving exams. They don't really match the curriculum very well, and they're primarily used to select the best students, not really to measure and assess learning on an ongoing basis and inform policies or instruction in the classroom. And so here we would say we've run into something that's misaligned for learning. And so maybe through the process of the diagnostic, we would identify that maybe this we consider to be a binding constraint to achieving learning improvements, and that something needs to change in terms of what information, what learning assessments are being implemented in the system in order to better align with the new curriculum. So that's just an illustration of kind of a process that you would walk through to try to identify misalignments. The diagnostic process itself has 6 main phases and is designed to be very highly participatory. So there's kind of an inception phase defining, the process and who's going to be involved. There's a desk review phase where the organization that's undertaking the diagnostic tends to have a lot of expertise in the context and the education system that they're working towards. So they start by filling in the framework with what they already know of the system. They do a desk review to review policies and practices that have already been well defined and identified. And then there's a process of stakeholder workshops and interviews to kind of validate what was found in the desk review and then fill in any ongoing gaps. There's an analysis step, trying to identify the key misalignments in the system based on this information gathering process. And then a prioritization workshop. And this is an important part because it involves a steering committee that's actually created in that inception phase. And the prioritization workshop always involves those government partners, and it's a process of walking through and thinking through the results and talking it through and saying, okay, what would the top priorities be for improving these improving learning outcomes or improving whatever the goal is that you're trying to work towards, for alleviating the misalignments, I should say. And then finally, a final report and kind of dissemination of what the diagnostic found and what those priorities are. And so at RISE, based on the experience of those pilots, we've developed a toolkit that walks you through the process of doing a diagnostic like this. So I'm not talking through this at all, but just to say we have kind of a toolkit that includes worksheets and step-by-step processes for going through the diagnostic process. These are some of the resources that we have available. So we just about 2 weeks ago put out our systems diagnostic toolkit, which is this kind of in-depth, step-by-step guidance on how you would do a diagnostic, referencing the examples from our pilots. So here's how they learned, here's what they did, kind of lessons learned from that. This is the URL for that. And then also about 2 weeks ago, we had a webinar where 6 of our pilot organizations shared about their experience and lessons learned. And that was recorded and has been posted and is actually in and of itself a nice resource for understanding how the diagnostic has been used in some of the findings in the process that organizations went through. So I included that there as kind of a resource for learning more about the diagnostic process, would be kind of watching that webinar and seeing that.